In 2017, the highly acclaimed Shadow of Mordor received its sequel, Shadow of War, which unfortunately released to insanely negative reception. The gameplay itself was not the reason for this reception though. Does anyone want to take a guess why this game was dead on arrival? Anyone? That's right, corporate greed. For some reason, this single-player game shipped with loot boxes? What? But I don't want to spend this video regurgitating that drama. I'm sure you've heard about it before. Instead, I want to be optimistic and look past it. Shadow of War is a fantastic game. I'm on my second playthrough of it right now, and I just really wanted to yap to you about what makes this particular game so great, even better than its predecessor. Of course, the first thing that comes to mind when talking about this game is the Nemesis system. It probably needs no introduction. Everyone and their grandmammy know what it is. Every time I'm under a social media post asking about the coolest mechanics in gaming, Nemesis is always the top reply. Despite that though, it truly does deserve all the praise it gets. To me, what the Nemesis system is, at its core, is an infinite story generation machine. And the best way I can explain what I mean is by telling you one of my first fond memories from the game ever. The tutorial stage of this game takes place in this lovely little city, which also happens to be under invasion by those pesky orcs. You are tasked with assassinating one of their commanders. I don't know if everyone gets the same guy, but in my playthrough it was Mog the Tyrant. What a great name. I seek him out and discover him to be giving orders to a group of his minions. I rudely interrupt his speech via murder, and I exit the area, forgetting his face 2 minutes later. I go on with doing main quests, forming new rivalries, and just generally talking all over the place. A few hours later though, and guess who I bump into? That's freaking right, it's Mog the Tyrant. Our old friend is back and he is out for blood. So he evaded death and went to hunt us down for revenge. I also love how his appearance has changed over time, with him being more heavily armored, or maybe that's because of his injuries. The point is, this orc we thought we killed returns several hours later in the open world. Not as a scripted story event, but simply to continue our rivalry. He's now a higher level too, which means he hits harder and narratively feels more dangerous. I put him in the ground again though. What's so cool about interactions like these is that they're just so natural. You could be doing something and an orc from hours ago finds you just like that. There are very few games I've played that put enemies on a pedestal like this. They aren't just bad guys you can slaughter and forget. They are fully blown characters on a hierarchy that's constantly shifting. The Nemesis system isn't just a neat gimmick. Shadow of War is built entirely around it. Almost everything you do feeds back into Nemesis in some sort of way. You interrogate worms to gather intel on commanders. If you want to take down a high-ranking orc, you first learn their weaknesses and eliminate their bodyguards to tilt the odds in your favor. If you're preparing to raid a fortress, you weaken its leadership beforehand to increase your chances of success. The entire structure of the game revolves around this system. There is no Shadow of War without Nemesis. Also, this game is kind of like a roguelike in the way it doesn't treat your character's death as punishment, but rather as a narrative arc almost. If you die to a common, no-name orc, they'll gain respect amongst their peers and be put on the hierarchy with a unique name, abilities, and personality. Canonically, Talion is banished from death, which is not only rad as fuck, but also neatly explains how these orcs can kill you and still remember you later on. The way they've crafted this game is just masterful. I love those types of games where death is explained in story rather than the video game logic of just respawning. Not only does Shadow of War remember who you fight, but it also remembers how you fight. Orc commanders have a bunch of combat traits to them. They have special abilities, they have a class which adjusts how they approach you, and they have weaknesses or vulnerabilities. This can range from a fear of burning to being weak against ranged attacks. That is where worms come into play. They're especially pathetic orcs who you can interrogate and find stuff out about the commanders. On a higher difficulty, it's especially recommended to gain this intel before a big fight because it can prove really useful. But the really clever thing about this game's balancing is that it doesn't let you abuse those vulnerabilities forever. When you're scrapping with a captain, repeating the same move over and over can actually backfire because there's a chance they'll adapt and learn how to counter it. So for example, if an orc is defensive from the front, the obvious solution is to vault over them and strike from behind. But do that one too many times and they'll gain a move that lets them shove you away mid-vault, which is honestly really freaking cool. It kind of reminds me of dynamic difficulty, where a game silently adjusts how hard or easy it is based on how you're playing. And while it's not exactly the same thing, Shadow of War is constantly rebalancing fights so they never feel too easy and always keep you on your toes. Sometimes my muscle memory betrays me and I catch myself making the same mistake over and over, and the orc slowly chips away at my health because of it. It feels completely fair because it's on me, it's my own issue, and it's honestly such a good feature because it'll make you think one way and then flip that around on you later. But it doesn't end there. Shadow of War is easily one of the best adaptations of free flow combat that I've ever played. If you're not familiar with free flow combat, it's the style popularized by games like Batman Arkham and Sleeping Dogs, where you move fluidly between enemies using attacks, counters, and dodges. True to the name, everything flows together naturally, keeping the momentum going until the fight is over. Normally, games with free flow combat are quite easy. They're essentially a power fantasy that makes you feel like you're in a cinematic action sequence. But in Shadow of War, the challenge is considerable if you're not careful. For example, you can be planning to assassinate a captain, a low-level one at that. Easy enough, right? But this captain is surrounded by a bunch of his minions, and there's archers dotted around the perimeter too. So if you jump in the center of that, you will have a very hard time because the captain is probably trying to hit you with attacks you can't counter, his minions are surrounding you so you can't really get a hit in on your target, and those pesky archers are constantly having you dodge their arrows. It can get real chaotic. The game encourages you to make use of stealth and environmental hazards such as exploding barrels or insect nests that can drop on top of orcs and bite them. Just jumping into the action as if you're playing an Arkham game is not as viable here, I feel like. My point is basically that this game is really well balanced. Even in the late or end game, I always found myself struggling in certain fights while breezing through others, which is a sign of a great game. One that always provides some sort of challenge, even if you have the best gear. A large majority of open world games I've played suffer from the same issue. They're packed with tons of activities and side content, but you're rarely ever encouraged to engage with it unless you're striving for 100%. That's not always a bad thing necessarily, but sometimes it does feel like developers build these massive open worlds first and then try to fill them with whatever content they can just to justify the size of the map. If you're anything like me, in situations like this, you quickly learn what content can be safely ignored and what actually provides meaningful benefits. After a few hours, I usually stop engaging with half the stuff on the map because I realize it doesn't really affect anything, it just creates the illusion of content. Shadow of War solves this problem, however. Instead of treating side content as optional filler, it ties almost everything you do back into the core systems of the game. No matter what activity you choose to do, it doesn't feel like you're not progressing in some shape or form. Let me explain. Whatever you choose to do in Shadow of War progresses you in some way. Killing captains reshapes the hierarchy. Dying does the same. Gathering intel from worms gives you valuable information for future fights. You can send death threats to increase a captain's viciousness, which in turn guarantees better gear drops. Taking out war chiefs makes fortress raids easier, and capturing those forts gives you control of the region, pushing you one step closer to world domination. You can also recruit defeated captains, strengthening both yourself and your army. Shadow of War's fate is sad because beneath all the launch drama, loot boxes, and industry greed, there's a really special game that many people never gave a fair chance. It is misunderstood. I honestly think the endgame is where it truly opens up. That's when the focus shifts towards sieges and domination, and you can really start honing in on your build and optimizing your armies and orcs. It's incredibly cool, and so many people never experienced it. This isn't just Shadow of Mordor 2, it's its own thing. And there are people such as myself who did give it another shot years after launch because we'd heard about it being a more consumer-friendly experience. But unfortunately, not everyone has given it that second chance, and understandably so. I think the idea of microtransactions in single-player games is genuinely unhinged. Even relatively minor things like XP boosts in Ubisoft games. To me, it sends the message that you don't trust your own game to be engaging enough on its own, so you offer players a way to pay to skip parts of it. Keep microtransactions in multiplayer games if you want, especially if they're cosmetic. But locking gameplay behind a paywall in a single-player experience should absolutely be called out and shamed. I'm glad Shadow of War is in the place it's in now. I wanted to make this video simply because of how much fun I've had revisiting it, and I hope that encourages you to give it another shot, whether you stopped playing during the terrible launch, or it's just been a few years since your last playthrough. If you're interested in more unique RPGs with cool gimmicks, do check out my recent Dragon's Dogma video in which I similarly shared my enjoyment of it. I'm gonna clock out now. See ya.